What else about Tom now? Where did we get at, I wonder?
Well, just
You're still
memories of
just
him.
Well, I have an awful lot with them because I, was so close to I was there when every one of their children were born. So that's why I seem so much closer to that family than I do any other. The rest of you were all gone, and Joe and I were here. And Tom was so good to help Joe when he was sick, He was always finding something for him to help him with out there. So we spent an awful lot of time out there with him. But then she decided to do the living room, and we'd take the wallpaper off and steam it off, and Brunyer killed herself with the steamer. Oh, he used to get in the worst messes. And he'd run a wheelbarrow from out in the yard, and boards, coming up the steps. They've changed the back since. And he would bring it full of cement or plaster, whatever he was using, running over these boards. And they put all that tile in that bathroom. Then when they'd get up in the morning, it was all in the bathtub. And that happened, I know, 4 or 5 times. So we finally got it. But the funniest thing, we walked in there one day, was when there was remodeling, this was when they was remodeling the kitchen. See, they moved the sink from over where the east wall to the west wall. And Pauline wanted to save some of the tile. For what, I don't know. She was as bad as he was saving things, but he was trying to get it off in nice big pieces. I don't know where they was going to put it because they was getting rid of it there. So he just took his claw hammer and he went like this. And boy, the plaster was flying. The room you couldn't see. And we had the door to the living room, and we could hear him mumbling and humming. He was humming. And he was banging away, and boy, it come down. But it wasn't in nice big pieces. And it come to the end of the cupboard, and her towel rack was hanging there. And I saw him. I peeked out. I opened the door a little ways, and he was just taking that off. And he took it off with the claw hammer. And it was all bent, never could be used again. And I said, I believe Pauline was planning on buying a new one of those. And he just looked over and grinned. Oh, the plaster is just flying everywhere, all through the house. But we used to have a lot of fun doing all those things, but they were forevermore remodeling. And he tried everything. He was like Jim. There wasn't anything that...
Now, why did they call, when they were over here the other day, why did they call their houses coops?
Chicken coops.
Chicken coops. They had chicken coops built in the back, yes.
But did they live in the chicken
coops? Oh,
no.
Just a little tiny house.
They did raise chickens, for a long time.
Well, the way it sounded like they were building their house.
They took one of their coops and cleaned it and modified it and made an additional house in the yard. That's where you got the house that Dale and Janine lived in, and they've rented since. It was made out of one of the chicken coops.
Old lumber.
But
we'd all go out there, and he hauled this lumber in from, I don't know where, some old barracks or something. And they'd bring it in, and the nails was in it and everything. And boy, we'd all get hammers, and we'd work hours taking all those little nails out. Boy, we worked hard, I'll tell you. Then Joe and I used to go out and even pour cement when they wouldn't be home. This was when Joe was miserable. Something for him to do. I know one time they had to take that whole walk out because it wasn't strong enough. The cement kept breaking up. And that was Joe and I alone out there one day. And Lord, I didn't know anything about it, only to shovel in what he told me to shovel into the mixer. It all hand mixed, not hand mixed, but we did have a mixer then to shovel the sand and dirt in. But we had lots of good times too. But I was there, and Dale and Janine had their family there. And that was just a little 3 rooms. And they run out of places to put a baby when a new baby was in. The last one they had in the dresser drawer. Had the drawer full. And then they went out to see, I don't know which one it was, but they had it in the dresser drawer. And he made bunk beds. He built them in, and he had drawers underneath all of them at the bottom where they could store things. The kids, in the kids' room.
Talking about Dale's family now.
Yeah, I'm not back to the family. Well, no, that isn't. You want to know more about Tom?
How did, well, are we to the point, how did he die?
Well, he died very suddenly, too. I guess you'd call it a heart attack, wouldn't you?
Yes. Seizure.
Seizure or something?
Cerebral seizure of some sort, yes. He was, Tom was a hard worker. He lent himself to many things. He didn't go to church, but if there was something to be built down at the church house, you could bet that he was in the middle of it. And he had a lot of skill as a plumber and a cement, particularly skillful in cement work.
He called them the smoking elders, did all the work.
Yeah, the smoking elders did the work.
That's what he always said, we smoking elders did the work. I know that when they built that new building that was up on the 23rd East there, he still
was
helped.
involved. Yeah, he did that. But for a short time after Mother died, I was very close to Tom, and he was in the process of trying to build that place up. Building chicken coops. He was going to get rich raising chickens and selling eggs. So he kept expanding. The one coop full wasn't enough. It wasn't making any money, so he built another coop, extended it, and finally got around to putting even a two-story coop. And all he did was succeed in losing more money with each transaction. But in the process of building the first one, we had some boys with the name of Mulholland who had a gravel pit on their place up on Holiday Boulevard, and they agreed to bring several loads of gravel down to Tom. Gravel mixed bank run, we called it, because you could shovel it right out of the hillside and mix it as cement. The spring of the year, their team just couldn't possibly pull that iron-tired wagon up into the yard, so they had to stop and just dump the gravel, sand and gravel, right where they were at. Tom came home and was pretty upset about it. He wasn't going to pay him, and I mentioned to him, well, they probably would have heck of a lot rather have you not pay him than to have to shovel that back up and take it up to the top of the driveway. And it came time to mix that and put down the floor for the base for the chicken coop. And I drew the unhappy task of using 2 coal buckets tied with a rope to the end of a stick across my shoulders, go down to the pile and fill the 2 skulls, fill them as full as I could lift them, which wouldn't be full at all with that wet gravel, and then carry them up and put them in the mix box, and Tom had mixed the cement and have it laid and smoothed out by the time I got back up with two or three more scoop shovels full. But everything that went on around that place was just that much hard work. It seemed like it was the darndest working place, always something. But in that process, I got pretty well acquainted with Tom. My interest in him as a football player was intense. Of course, I should be as great. You know, when I get to high school, I'm going to be granted high school's 2nd greatest end, which didn't quite work out. Frank Christensen got around me on an end run one day, and as he went by, he took the top of my head off with his knee, so that kind of spoiled my football career. But Tom was always interested in me. He always tried to be kind and interested, and as I got feeling lower and lower and glummer after Mother's death, and as I look back now, I think I must have been close to almost a mental breakdown on the thing, at least feeling so sad. But he would take quite a bit of time to cheer me up about it. And if I would be in trouble down at school because I hadn't bothered to go for 2 or 3 days in a row, and forged his name on an excuse to get back and get a class permit, he never would reprimand me about it, but just suggested that it wasn't the right thing to do, which is about all even a dad can do, I guess, for his son when it happens. My lot in life took me away from there, so I didn't get in on all of the things, but he made a career finally of working for the gas line construction company. And in working around the hot tar that they doped the pipes with as they put them in the ground, he became totally allergic to it, and finally his face was just one scar from eczema, from irritation. He just couldn't keep clear. And because he was a good employee, they finally put him into a warehouse administrative position, which gave him a little relief from this thing. And then, you boys will recall this, he became a benefactor of mine as I parted company with Lynn Austin in Ogden as a Boy Scout executive. Tom found me a job with one of the construction companies doing contract work for the gas company. And after being in the hospital with my back surgery and then working one full summer, and I went to work the last of June and worked till the end of September, hard work out on that construction job, lifting and timbers and shoveling and working hard, it cured my back problem. I got strong enough then that, and so Tom was a benefactor, and earlier than that he was also a benefactor to me by finding part-time work for me during vacations. I could work during Thanksgiving weekend off from school, or Christmas weekend off from school, and Easter weekend off from school, and he would see that I got a job on the gas line doing the kind of work that I could do, even though I'd have to lie like a trooper that I was old enough to be working on that kind of work, but it provided me with a little money for clothes, so he was helpful to me in this way. I have warm feeling for Tom.
I remember my memories of him. I never could tell whether he was an extremely grouchy person or an extremely pleasant person. I never quite made up my mind as a kid whether he was somebody to be afraid of or somebody to like an awful lot. And it seemed like he was both. Was he in fact harsh at sometimes? Was he quite
just like her dad, you had to know him to understand him and not pay too much attention to his barks.
He'd bark, but I can tell you one time out here when we was putting in this fence that Tom put in done the cement work and built the forms for the cement, and Mr. Wilcox, nobody was here in this lot then. There wasn't a house then. And this is Tom to a T. Mr. Wilcox come to his back fence over there, and there was a lot between, and he said, "Tom, don't you think a short-handled shovel would be better?" He was shoveling and rocks. We had rocks just about like they did out there.
I know.
And he says, "No, this will just be fine." Went right on, Steve. That harsh, gruff voice, you know. No, and it wasn't 2 minutes till he went back over to his fence and said, "Mr. Wilcox, I believe I would like to have that shovel." So he barked, but when the girls were gone with fellas, Tom always laid on the floor. After supper, Tom laid on the floor. You could go there any time after dinner, and he'd be on the floor, unless they were going out or something. And Bill Wynn was scared to death of him. They always, the other girls weren't old enough when this was going on. But Bill, he was afraid of him, but he'd come, and Tom would be over close to the door, and he'd knock on the door, and Bill Wynn would have to step over him to get over across the room. And and Bill was one of the best friends he had. Bill just loved him. The last job he ever did was to help Bill with these side cement steps on that new house they was building down there. But it was just his way. He was just like our dad. He'd bark. His bark was worse than his bite, same as mine. As I've said before, we put our foot in her mouth and had to yank it out. But I think that a lot of the young kids was scared to death of him too, you know. They thought he was grouchy too. I guess they probably have those kind of memories of him, the grandchildren out there, I don't know. And yet he'd do anything for them. When they went on their big family reunions, Tom took over all the kids and entertained them all the time they were gone. He was awful good to the kids. And he always was. He was really good. He just wasn't gruff as he seemed, just like you thought he was.
The first time I ever saw him the first time I saw Uncle Tom and felt that there was humor and lightness in him,
Yeah.
would have been the Success Summit family reunion.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there that there was a very light and jovial and playful mood, and he was a clown, and I can still remember specifically some of the clowning. They ended up with an egg throwing contest in the kitchen one evening, and I just remember it seemed so out of character that Uncle Tom was involved in making eggs disappear and coming up cracked on top of somebody's head.
Maybe you'd had an eyeball to...
Well, I suspect that the hair was left up a little bit.
That year, you know, Gwen and Judy came up with Florence and Mart to the reunion at Camp Success that year. And Mart, of course, always had his highballs. Wanted to just get it. If they want me, we'll turn off the button for a minute. Well, anyway, Mart says to Tom when they was hauling their stuff to put where it was supposed to be, why he said, Mart says, Tom, I got a bottle up in the car. He says, oh, come on inside. And we had that big room out of that big cat, yes. And he said, the bottles was lined up in there. He said, what? Mart was so surprised. He thought he was going to a church social. And he found out it wasn't a church social at all. But everybody had a good time at that one. Remember how they danced? And Bob Buck played his horn.
Oh, yeah.
And each drink he'd take his cap and throw more to the one side. And by the time the night was over, that's the time Russell said the next morning we went down to the, what did you call the house we was in? Not the cabin, the lodge. The lodge. And Russ must have been there because this was, yes, they were there. Their kids were there. And when Thelma came into the lodge, Russ says, well, how's, now who was the big trumpet man at the time?
James.
James, yeah. Gosh, he got the biggest kick out of it. Oh, it was her. Thelma said to Russell, well, what's James's first name? Harry James. Thelma says, Harry James don't feel so well this morning. I thought Russell would roll off his chair. It tickled him to death.
My recollection of that same night, probably the most vivid, is Juan Gayton sitting over in the corner playing his guitar, and they were plying him with highball after highball after highball, and Juan was just moving off into total oblivion, and playing. He'd play a guitar and sing 4 or 5 words, and all of it in Spanish. And was just drifting off into the most melancholy world that I'd ever seen in my life, and it reached a point they couldn't shut him up, and Juan was just singing as loud as he could sing over in the corner, a counter to the guys playing the horn and them trying to dance, and he had his own little orchestra. I still remember that vividly. That was
Well, I remember back to Martin's comment about that party that year, he came quite reluctantly because he thought this was going to be a Mormon.
He thought we was a bunch of saints, and we
He was
weren't.
afraid to death he was going to get into something. And when he came down from the bunkhouse the next morning, he walked in and he said, "Boy, this Gwilliam family sure has a lot of fun at their reunions." So he was a member from then on in.
Yeah, but he liked it.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I remember him dancing that night, too. He rolled up his pant legs to about his knees, Mark did. And you know, you all had those caps, like those golf caps we wear now, you know. Everybody had one of those on. But every drink any of them would take, the hat would go farther. The peak was finally down the bag.
do you want to go on to Francis now?
Yeah, sure.
I think we've said quite a bit about Tom. He died very young, too. Well, he was 57. He was the oldest at that time. Now, Frances is the next, and you want me to name her kids?
Yeah.
You did before. Suppose I can without looking at the book. David, Owen, Keith. There's not too many. Karma.
Carol.
Carol's older than Karma. Carol, Karma, and Boyd. That's their 6. And of course they got a little offspring too. We won't go into that.
Now this is a brother and sister married a brother and sister.
Yes, that's right. See, Tom and...
We lived in opposite sides of a dual family house on Highland Drive, and the 4 of them spent the whole summer courting each other under the walnut trees.
Yeah, I wanted to throw him over the banister many times. Joe and I come down to spend the weekend and crying, and there was no place for us to park. We had to turn around and go back home. Tom and Pauline was parking in one room and Russ and Vera in another. And Francis and Doug in another. So you know they were kind of busy. And but it was a fact. We'd just turn around and go back to Park City. Mother used to feel kind of bad.
room at the inn, you might as well go home.
That's just right.
I can recall, and it would apply to this family because Pauline and Francis had their first children not very far apart. Don't recall exactly how far apart they were, but when they were ready to give birth, why, of course, they came home to Mother. And I would be around the house until such time as it was getting critical, and then Mother would come out and suggest maybe I ought to go for a walk or something. But each time I'd come home,
She made it easy, huh?
yeah, came home and was and both the 2 first nephews of mine in the next generation were boys. There were boys who were nephews of mine, Dale and David.
Francis, Tom and Pauline was born in 1926, and Francis and Doug was born,
Married me?
or married, I mean, yes. When was they married? Here she is, right here. Married. Oh, married in 20. They were married in 26, and Tom and Pauline was. They were both married in 26, weren't they?
Not
No.
very far apart.
Yes, they were. One in 1944, and the other one in. It's a good thing I got my bifocals. I can't even see the thing. I'm glad you found them out. I've had them on all the time since I was here before. Oh my gosh. Let's see, who are we talking about?
Francis.
Francis. Well, Francis had a long, hard-working life too. Of course, I've told you a lot about Francis and I being such close. But we weren't when we were younger. And the reason we weren't. You see, I've had my foot in my mouth most of my years. Charlie James told me one day, you've kind of mellowed a little bit. I begin to wonder sometimes after I've had my foot there if I am. I'm not right sure. But they moved a lot, you know. They started out here, out by Sandy there somewhere. They worked for his father on the milk ranch, didn't they, Jim?
Yeah, that was south on Highland Drive, just before you get to Fort Union Boulevard.
Yeah.
Grandpa Bigler had a large holding in there, about where the Whitmore Library is, at least on that side of the hill, right in there. But they milked cows and raised pigs. Mr. Bigler was a tremendous farmer, but Doug drew the assignment to run the milk route. They were running a retail milk route. And living in a little two-room house that sat back in the apple orchard. But she had kids right along regularly.
Every 18 months.
Seems like, anyway. I helped Doug on the milk route a little bit. Help milk, and would go out there at milking time. And they were among the first to install automatic milking machines, so that reduced the long pressure of milking. And they had an abundance of milk, which they cooled immediately, handled very efficiently, and put it in bottles, kept it cold overnight. But in the meantime, used much of the milk and, of course, the apples and some surplus potatoes that the steam from the cleaning device to steam all the cans and so on was put into a big steel barrel, 50, 60 gallon barrel, and they cooked all of it, including the milk, for the pigs. Combine the potatoes and the apples and cook them for the pigs. But in the morning, Doug would come by and pick me up at 3 o'clock, 3:30, and we'd make a milk run before I had to be to school at Granite. And the milk run was right here in the Sugar House area, in Highland Drive, and go down to about 50th East from 21st South into maybe 17th South, someplace along in there, and we didn't delivering to every house, but just his own subscribers. There were a whole bunch of milk deliverers of this sort. It was a competitive business. People had lots of milk and not many customers, so they were working hard to build it up. You'd see these little vans that they were using, small trucks they were Chevrolets or Fords, but they would just buzz around like flies in the mornings. You'd go by them going one way, and then you'd meet them going the other way. And one day the inevitable happened. Doug took a short inside corner right on 21st South and Highland Drive, and the fellow coming north made the short left inside corner, and 2 milk trucks, boom, head on. There were only paper caps pushed down in the bottles in those days. The Board of Health didn't know that caught germs. There was no cap over them, and I don't think there was a bottle of milk at either truck that didn't just up over our heads.
All this time I wasn't down here.
No.
This was when Jim was around, but I wasn't.
And Doug didn't like the farming. He didn't like farming a bit, so he went into specialty sales. He was always looking through catalogs and magazines to find some quick way to get rich, particularly in the sales field. The first that I remember was some cosmetics of some sort. And his method was not only to sell some himself, but to recruit everybody in the family that he could to carry a kit and sell. He was the originator, I guess, of the pyramiding type plan. And he even included me on a couple of these recruiting businesses. And my conscience just wouldn't let me sell a whole kit of that stuff, because most of it looked like it was junk to me, but there was one hand lotion that the ladies liked. So I stripped all the hand lotion out of the kits and sold them, and Doug was left holding the bag for a bunch of half-filled kits, so I didn't work for him very long in that regard. But he went from that to steamless cookers to 10 easy lessons on how to play guitar and throw the guitar in free. He was this kind of a promoter.
These kettles, there was so many pans, you know, steam, it was a steam cooking.
Steam cooking.
But it wasn't the heavy metal, it wasn't the heavy
It was
aluminum.
galvanized.
It was lightweight. And he'd come up and borrow Joe's car and stay in our place, and he'd go all over the county. And then everywhere he went in Park City, he, of course, told them who he was, and that he was related to Joe, close probably. And he always brought the car home empty of gas. Joe would get it filled for him the next morning, and away he'd go again. Now, those kind of things shouldn't be in my story, but it's there. Pauline was here, she'd say, well, that isn't true. I shouldn't even said that. I won't let her see it.
This can all be edited.
Yes. Some of that I wouldn't.
Yeah, if we sell it to CBS, we'll edit it a little bit.
We have to.
You ought to hear the stories we got on one of the other
So on the other, we used my favorite word several times.
Favorite word.
And you know they don't smell very good.
But really, we all became quite concerned about Frances because she seemed to be sitting in poverty all the time. And it's to be said to her lack of credit, I guess she was probably one of the lousiest housekeepers there was in the world in her younger days. She had babies frequently, but at the same time spent a lot of her time with the diapers in a bucket and reading true romance or something of the sort. But all of us got a hand in trying to take food to them or take some produce to them. A couple of trips I made with Gibb to take them excess peaches or grapes or something that he'd gotten. But they finally made their way by going up into Alaska at the beginning of the boom, and from there on in they were very substantial.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that
They did very well.
I would guess that Keith at least is probably a millionaire, and the other boys aren't far behind, I think.
Whenever you start talking about Frances, it almost always ends up being a discussion of Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Was
trouble.
she totally overshadowed? Was
Completely
she
Oh, dominated.
Completely.
Just like this.
She willingly did it. There was never any objection.
No,
she
she
made
never
up her mind
complained.
that she was going to be a helpmeet, and
She
that
was.
she'd made her bed, and she would stay with it, and did loyally.
But
In
she was
fact,
right under his thumb.
I made a mistake one day in making an observation that she'd just throw him out and make it away herself. And boy, I learned in 10 simple words that you don't say a bad word about Doug Bigler to her.
What? I cannot recall ever hearing stories about Frances as a younger girl at home, and still in the family home.
She
Well,
was home mixing bread and not washing diapers and riding between towns with him a lot. Over and when Dave and Ag lived in Eureka, she used to come over there with the bread she'd started to mix just to get away from home for a little while. She'd take her bread along with her, have to knead it and mix it down and put it in the pans and bake it over at Ag's. I think it was they were out in Silver City or someplace. Mammoth, I think is where it was. But she was always home.
when we lived in the little house next to the schoolhouse, and that's the only way I can describe this, out on Highland Drive, right by the Oakwood School, Dad was not feeling well. We were poor, I'm sure of that. Didn't know it, didn't realize it. But it was still a fun place. There was still always something going. And if Joe and Mary came, Florence would come and stay. And pretty soon there was a water fight, chase around through the house, catch as catch can. And Mother always right in the middle of it, throwing buckets of water and
Bringing the hose in.
bring the hose in all the way into the house to squirt somebody out. A neighbor fellow named Henry Woodruff had kind of taken a shine to Frances. She would have been, what, 15 years old, I guess?
Yeah.
14, 15, and Henry was about the same. And I don't know whether Frances realized it, but Henry had a crush on her. And he would find all kinds of excuses to come over to, just to be around, just to talk, just to visit. And there'd been a water fight going on earlier, and everybody dried out, and Frances and Florence, the sister Florence, had identical gingham aprons, gingham dresses, and both went in and put them on. And there was a great deal of similarity between the two of them in size and shape. And Henry came over and he saw whom he thought was Frances sitting under the apple tree. So he carefully sneaked onto the garden hose that was laying there and turned it all full force and came around the house and right straight on her, you know. And she whooped up out of there, something less than kind words, and Henry saw that, dropped the hose with it still going this way and headed straight for home, and I don't think he ever came back on the yard again.
His mother, he turned it on, huh?
Oh, Florence.
Florence. Oh, yeah, Florence. Yeah,
Florence.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, he took her right by surprise.
We had many good laughs in that little old house. Good Lord, there wasn't even there was nothing in there. I can't remember much about it.
I can.
I
If
know.
I were an artist, I could paint a picture, and all I'd have to do is paint a black stove and a kitchen table and 4 chairs.
We did have a couple of beds, I guess.
Yes, both in the same room.
Both in the same room.
The whole
What
house.
did you guys do? You know, nowadays kids come home in the evening and watch TV. What did you do with the family then? I know you went sledding at Park City
In
someday.
Park City, we did a lot of that.
Milk
We used
the
to-
cow.
But
Yeah.
Well, you had to always have some chores to do, milk the cow and feed the chickens and this sort of thing. But when we lived there next to the schoolhouse, there was a little grocery store just a block to the north. The Woodruff family, Henry's folks, ran a little grocery store. And out of the front of the building, there was what they called a gooseneck lamp that just hung down over the door entrance. And as soon as it got dusk, particularly in the spring and summer evenings, all the kids in the neighborhood, it was the only place there was a light. So you went down and gathered around in front of Woodruff's store, and you played games there. You start a game of tag, start a game of hide and seek, start a game of kick the can, and Frances would be involved in these along with me, even though we were separated in years. As soon as we moved to the big house down next to the dairy, the Stevenson house, then Frances and Tom got involved in the process of growing up, and anything from there on out was determined by their girlfriend and boyfriend.
How much older than Frances?
From me,
From you?
5 years. About 5 years.
Just enough space so she never really was a
Jim was born in
growing up friend.
1913, and Frances was born in 1907.
How old was she when she got married? How old was Frances when she got married?
17.
She was 17, she got married then.
One thing about Frances that we haven't mentioned yet, that somewhere along the line she developed a very bad abscess, cancer, I guess they finally called it, in her ankle.
In the bone
The
there.
ankle bone, right in the ankle bone, and the treatment was pretty limited, but they had all kinds of people look at it and discuss it. And finally, and I think it was Sheranian, Dr.
I thought it was Riley.
Well, it could have
It was,
been. I wouldn't know for
operated,
sure,
it was
but
Riley.
a fellow named Sheranian was one of the Murray doctors, I'm sure, that they consulted.
Mhm.
But they finally took to the hospital and operated on her, and she just lost all the rest of her life. She just had a hole where her
There's just a deep hole.
shin bone was. And
She was on
I
crutches
got
for-
I got my head nearly knocked off one day. She and I were always fighting with each other, arguing like you and Alice May, flipping each other with a towel, who was going to dry, who was going to wash, who was going to do this, and who was going to that. And I got angry and reached over and attempted to kick her on the shin. I didn't make it, but I had every evil intent. Mother intercepted. And I was the one that got kicked on the shin, believe me. But we learned after that to be pretty cautious with Frances and her leg, and it did bother her for a long, long time.
Frances' disposition was an awful lot like Mother's. Very calm and quiet, you know. I never heard her raise her voice to anybody. I never did. If you did, why?
Always laugh.
Yeah, always jolly and good-natured. No matter how, and he never complained. They were poor as church mice, believe me. But you never heard anything from her at all.
Well, how young was Frances when you got married and left home there?
Let's see, I was married in 25 and she was born in 1907.
So she was
Figure
older.
that, huh?
12 years old. She was about 12
Yeah,
years old.
yeah. Because I know the first Christmas I come down after they left Park City, I felt so silly because I brought a tiny little sewing kit that'd be for a little kid about 4 years or 5 years old, you know. And here she was, you know, like you said, she was 12 or 13 years old. And it just shocked me because of course, we didn't travel a lot in the wintertime, you know. We just stayed home. But, she was always good-natured, very, very, very much like Mother. And she and I've got so many happy memories because we took those tours together, and she was such fun. We had the best. I think we was the only two that, I think sometimes people didn't know whether we was laughing at them or with them, because I wasn't laughing at all. She'd doze off to sleep in the afternoon in the bus, you know, riding along. And she missed some of the most beautiful scenery. We went up through, and we was going through the Smoky Mountains and up in that area, and it was fall. Oh, the colors were just out of it. I was the only one, me and the driver, that saw that. Everybody was sound asleep. And I nudged her 2 or 3 times, and she'd shake her head and put her head back and conked again. So I said, boy, you sure missed all that beautiful scenery. Well, the sleep was more important to her, I guess. But that's what I went for, to see it all.
When Doug and Frances made their move back from Alaska, one of the reasons, of course, bringing the move was to get Boyd into a rehabilitation center in San Francisco. But they had likewise developed some capital, and he was ready to come back to the States. They'd pretty well worn out the Alaskan boom, and they bought a new car just as soon as they arrived in the lower 48, as they call it, someplace in Seattle or something like that. Drove it as far as Reno, and then stopped there at our place in Galena Creek. I don't know whether you would have remembered them being there. Not that they did. They stayed for several days. Doug had the car service and then went on their way. But from that point on, I think, well, I mellowed towards Doug because obviously they were not doing very well, and Frances was happy, and she and I developed a close affinity for the balance of the time that we were where we could see each other. Anytime I came to Salt Lake, I always took time to call them or go visit them. The years we lived in St. George, I nearly always called her when I came up here, and on occasions would go and visit with her. So we did get very, very close to her. And then on the morning that she died, I've forgotten now exactly where it was. You were with me. We were going someplace, and I stopped in her house to talk to her. She hadn't been feeling very well. She was.
That was on a Sunday.
Laying on a couch. But sis, how you feeling today? Oh, I'm fine. Raised
She
up.
always says she's fine.
I'm fine. Feel fine. And by the time we got wherever it was we were going, why the boys were trying to find me to come to to convey the information to Mary that she'd passed away, and she just had a massive heart attack that just took her like that.
I've always felt bad to think they didn't call us on Sunday, because we could have been down to the hospital and seen her on Sunday after they took her to the hospital.
Probably.
Because it was shortly after you left there, you know, we were going out to dinner,
Yes.
and we'd invited her to go, and she told me, she said, well, I better not go. I really don't feel too good today. And when Jim got up here, he told me she didn't look good. But then that was on Sunday, and Monday, well, she was dead. But I always felt bad to think they didn't. Of course, the two boys were away.
Well, she was in an intensive care unit anyway, probably wouldn't have been able to see it.
Well, it happened so sudden. I don't think so, Jim.
Well, she called the paramedics herself.
Well, yes, at home, I know. She called them. But even when you got down there, why, it just seemed, I just thought, and I tried all afternoon on Sunday to call her, and Monday morning I tried to call her, and then Jim and Alice finally come up, and I was sputtering because they'd let their dog, or some little damn dog, tear my book, and I was sputtering away. Do you remember that, Alice? I was just going, and they finally had to tell me what had happened, you know. Boy, I was numb. But she had been in Washington, and she had pneumonia, and she was very sick all the time she was there. And she was up there for 3 weeks before and through Christmas. And she had an awful bad cough when she came home. And we were out to dinner. We went out, and she and I used to go to dinner an awful lot together. And we were out to dinner and on Tuesday, and then Monday, the following Monday, she was dead. So that happened real sudden.
Just back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to think of Francis and Doug without Boyd. The other kids are kind of a,
Yeah.
you know, I've known them and I know of them, but I do not know the story of Boyd's accident. What?
Well, he and a friend was speeding. They missed a curve. This happened in the last.
Teenage automobile accident.
Mm-hmm.
A little beer involved.
Was he driving the car? Was the other kid?
I don't remember.
I couldn't verify that.
I
Don't
couldn't
know.
either. I don't know for sure. But now there's a good happy-go-lucky if you ever want to be around, but he never complains. And look at the years he's been in that wheelchair. Never one complaint out of him. Never.
You know, he made a remarkable recovery and certainly has done all right. They couldn't get any further treatment for him other than just getting him patched up in Alaska.
That
So
was,
they came
that was
down.
part of the motive for coming back.
Yes.
Wasn't it?
Totally, almost totally, except that they also sold everything they had up there, which included 1 or 2 airplanes. They came home with quite a little nest egg.
But Francis did book work for the company all the time.
Yes, and under the fact that Boyd was employed, he was employed by and they were a corporation. They operated as a company, and so much of his medical expense was covered under workman's compensation. I think they had to have some special hearings for it to be established as such that he was or was not on official company business, but the hearing finally determined that he was, and as a result of this, they were able to get much of that rehabilitation treatment paid for without having to dig into their...
That's where he met his wife, was in San Francisco at the rehabilitation center. Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just knew
You've
very
had
little
as
about
much contact with him since then as we have whenever we
Yeah.
come family reunions.
Reason.
And even as I attended Carol's husband's funeral 2-3 weeks ago, they were there, and the support that those boys give Boyd, they just one unit. They just know they don't move until they see that Boyd's got himself taken care of first.
growing up, even though it's on the tape, I was aware that the affection for Doug and Francis and that family was not the same as it was for Tom or for Russ or...
No, you always remember, they was on one side of the hall and we was on the other.
Yeah.
And it's that way to this day.
I I don't have, to this day, I don't have any particular fond
No.
feelings or identity or
Closeness,
connection
no.
with it. But the one thing that was obvious, extremely obvious, is that they moved in unison. They all marched in a single step.
To the same drum.
Now, was
And they
that
were all the
Doug?
same.
Was that Doug? Was Doug
Well, he
Doug
was
as
the
free
colonel head of the
patriarch?
thing, he was the colonel head of the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and set the pattern for it, but as soon as the boys reached the position of maturity, they eased Doug off into emeritus status, so that all he had to do was sit home and write fancy promotional letters, employee esprit and this sort of thing. He edited and wrote for several years a little magazine that MDECO company published and distributed to all their people. And that was a big organization at one time. On its way to outdo
She worked right along
AMCO
with them.
against AMCO.
She never missed a day of work. She worked right along with them all the time. She done book work of some kind, I don't know what. But Francis and I had a good, the last few years, after Bud died especially, we had a very,
Now, do you want to talk about the last member of the family?
about you.
Well, I wonder, do we want to do that, or do we want to do it on a whole separate tape?
yeah.
Maybe
Don't
that,
worry about
maybe
it.
that.
I was just kidding her to see if she'd have anything good to
What,
say.
tell one or two little, okay, can you name all of his kids?
Oh, yes. Alice, Jim, Carolyn, Robert, and Steve. Did I miss anybody?
Nope. Right. Not that I know of.
None to speak of.
Gee, I'd have an awful hard time if we had a reunion. I had to remember everybody's names now.
I think she'd come closer to it than most of the rest of us could.
All right. There's
Well,
been-
let's say how did you perceive him as a young child, because you saw him come, what, other than you told about the recollections of them wrapping him in a little blanket and putting him in the oven, or what
Oh,
you do?
yes.
Oh, yes, that's
But,
was even warm.
That was to keep
but
him on. He was-
then can you remember, how did you feel when each one of the other young
I didn't want to wash the first diapers, I'll clue you on that. And I had it to do. And I didn't do it till my father made me. But I don't know, his younger years, I don't know, things just went along as any other family that I can recall. He knows more about what he did than I do.
No, but this is your impressions of him.
Just another kid.
I told him the story the other day when he was, I think he was 4 years old then. And I told this at the reunion one time too. He came running in and he always wore Dad's old hat. He always had an old hat. You've got a picture, I'm sure, of it down in your album. And he had overalls that had these big brass buttons in the buttonholes, And I think they had suspenders. I can't remember. I know they wasn't Levi style. They were overalls. But anyway, the zipper, there was no zipper.
button.
And he come in and he was holding himself and he had to go to the bathroom so bad. Grace and Emma both remember this because they was there. He came running in, he had to go to the bathroom, so I was trying to help him to hurry, And he says, I had it once and you made me wash it. I don't remember when he made it to the bathroom or not. And then I helped carry him today.
I wonder where the bathroom would have been other than
Right off
the
the kitchen there.
We had a bathroom in that house in Park City?
No. The bath, we had hot water, that's as far as we got. We still had to run down. But anyway, you come home, because I think your mother insisted you come in the house to wet. To the bath, the toilet anyway. He said, I had it once and you made me wash it. Then I helped him the time he run the drumstick in his mouth. Mother was way up the upper end on King Canyon Road, nursing. And here he come home crying with this thing. I don't know whether we pulled it out or it was still in there. But I carried him from home there on where we lived in the big house, all the way up there. Scared to death that Lord, he was going to die or something, you know. And he was you what, 5 years old? 4 years old? 5.
Yeah.
And I carried him all the way up there to Mother. And then they had to get the doctor, of course. And I know, did they stitch it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the doctor
3 pairs
called
of
did it.
stitches. And I was told later they even reduced the soft palate because that was what was causing my speech problem. Too much mouthful of flesh.
He used to say, "Nommy, nummy, nit, nimmy," putting ends on everything. And Tom used to say, "A down a daff for a cow and a calf." When we was little, a down a daff. We'd go sleigh riding with the Campbell family, and they'd be sleigh riding, you know. We'd put quilts in the sleigh bed and then go down through Snyderville. And Art Campbell, I think, was Tom's age. And he says, "Oh, look, there's a town of Taft." And Tom says, "That is not, it's a down of Daft." Just a little bit of kid. There was a big difference in the town of Taft and the down of Daft.
Any other memories of him when he was younger?
I can't think of anything very exciting. I can remember the time you built the snow. You've got all that in your own story when you built the snow house. You took the clock.
Family clock, yeah.
Yeah. But he's got that all in his story. But I hadn't wanted to care of him because his mother'd be out nursing. And I guess we got along. I don't ever remember having a slap you or anything.
Well,
I never was much at slapping. I might have hollered my head off, but I didn't do any slapping. But I never remember even doing that with you. You was the baby, you know, for a long time. Frances always called him her baby brother.
Yeah, well, right down to the end.
Right down to the very end.
That was not a flattering term when you're 7 or 8 years old.
Baby brother.
Gave me a psychic scar all my years that they called me the baby.